I awoke in the middle of the night, leaving my home in Ohio at 1:30 a.m. to drive near 3 hours to Pittsburgh to reach an Amtrak train at 5:20 a.m. The Amtrak train would take me to Washington, D.C. to start my 7-day bicycle and camping journey along 2 connected trails, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Trail and the Greater Allegheny Passage. Combined, those run between Washington, D.C. and Pittsburgh for a total of about 334 miles of off-road biking. I opted to travel by Amtrak that runs along the trails and allows one to take their bike without the need of boxing it up to get from Pittsburgh to DC for the start. The 2 times I rode the Gap before, I used coach seats, though for this trip I reserved a sleeper car to make it easier to catch some sleep during the 8-hour ride. Once I arrived in D.C., it was relatively easy to get to the start of the C&O Trail. To do so, I rode through the National Mall. I wanted to see the sights, though in my mind, D.C. brought thoughts of politicians and politics that was less than peaceful. People were sparse in D.C., though, maybe due to COVID. The ride was relaxing, the scenery iconic, and the feeling of alienation I felt to D.C. was replaced with a feeling that this capital belonged partly to me and me to it. The first day was a 41-mile ride to the Marble Quarry campsite. There was some mud, there was some rain, it was very hot. Squirrels seemed to intentionally zigzag across the path, but there were deer to ride right up to, and there was a nice campsite to arrive to at the end of the day with a river to go down and refresh in. My plan was to take advantage of the free camping along the sites of the C&O, often spaced about 5 miles apart, to camp 3 nights until I splurged with a hotel stay in Cumberland, where the C&O ends and the Gap begins. I would then start the Gap's initial 22-mile climb up 1,800 feet of elevation to the Easter Continental Divide, followed by 2 more nights of camping as I would make it along the trail back to my car in Pittsburgh. The second day was a 76-mile ride to the North Mountain campsite. I hadn't planned for it to be that long, but a few of the campsites were full. There was some mud that continued along the trail, ultimately leading to me cleaning my chain that evening. There were waterfalls. I lost my hat for the first time and grabbed a Sheetz sub for dinner. I rode the Greater Allegheny Passage Gap Trail of about 150 miles from Cumberland to Pittsburgh twice before, once this past year on my own, and once earlier this summer with my 14-year-old son Alex. The Gap is a rail-to-trail, mostly flat and well-maintained gravel. This trip would be the first time I also biked the C&O, adding 184.5 miles along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. It is a national park and well maintained, though the surface varies from smooth gravel to paths of dirt I imagine were once used by horses to pull the canal boats. Most of the trail follows between the canal and the Potomac River. The third day was a 46-mile ride to the Purslane Run campsite. The weather continued to be hot, which caused me to continue to sweat. Having access to the well water at the campsites was a great resource, but I would have traded the iodine flavor for some ice-cold water at any time. one of the highlights of this day was coming upon the Paw Paw Tunnel. The approach seemed steampunk or western. The tunnel itself was coolly refreshing, and being forced to walk the bike through the tunnel was a welcome break from riding it. The days of riding had caused some saddle pain. One of my favorite campsites along the C&O immediately followed the Paw Paw Tunnel. It was a welcome break to go down to the river and freshen up. The fourth day was the shortest, which was intentional. The ride was to Cumberland, and I knew the next day would start with a 22-mile ride uphill. It's not a hard ride, but it's a long and it's a slow ride. I'd reserved a hotel in Cumberland that evening to take advantage of the showers and the laundry and the opportunity to refresh before the next day. The fifth day was a 44-mile ride to Rockport, one that I had done before on my previous trips on the Gap. It did start with a 22-mile ride uphill, but I found that it wasn't nearly as difficult as before, maybe from having ridden across the rougher surface of the C&O the previous days, maybe because I appreciated the cloud cover and a break from the heat. At the top of the hill, one reaches the Mason-Dixon line and the Easter Continental Divide. It's a nice view, it's a nice break, and from there, one knows that the following days are going to be slightly downhill and a bit easier. Bridges and tunnels are some of the highlights of the bike ride. And by this day, I had worked out some of the kinks with my video equipment to be able to gather some better footage. I looked forward to getting to Rockport. I enjoyed the campground there, especially the free firewood provided by the campsite, something that's difficult to gather when you're riding on a bike. The opportunity to go into town and grab a Stromboli and a gallon of fresh ice-cold water. For the sixth day, I rode 56 miles to the Round Bottom campground. This day of the Gap is one of my favorites for scenery. I did encounter one tire puncture, but the tubeless tires in the ceiling quickly resolved it. For lunch, I grabbed a sandwich at Ohiopyle and went down to the river to eat. I enjoy the Round Bottom campground. Though it doesn't have any access to potable water, it has shelters for use and is located at a wonderful spot on the river. After taking the opportunity to clean up a bit, I was able to put up my hammock, sit back, relax, and eat a great Cuban from the Kickstand Cafe that I picked up on the way. Day 7 and the last day of the ride was 51 miles to Pittsburgh. It's not my favorite day of the ride, and I don't know if that's because it's the last and I'm worn out, if it's because it tends to start to run through more urban areas, or if by that point I'm just clocking in the miles to get back to my car. I get energized as I see the river, signs of industry, and signs of getting closer to the destination in Pittsburgh. Unlike some other trailheads, the one for the Gap at the point on the rivers in Pittsburgh feels like a true destination, a real end to the trip. Even the ride from the point back to my car's garage was scenic.